All right, if we're all ready, we can start the Community Infrastructure Services Committee. We have 7 items for consent. Do I have a mover for the consent items? Moved by Councillor Ioannidis. There's a couple people in the queue already. Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For item number 1, my parents own property close by. This type of item for a name change, wouldn't really constitute as a conflict, but because for final site plan approval, this is a requirement, so I will just declare a conflict and I'll vote on this matter.
So conflict on number 1?
Yes.
Okay. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I have a question on items number 6 and 7. I'd like to have that move out if we can.
Okay. Councillor Fernandez.
Same. I have a question on number 7. I'd like to move it out of consent into discussion.
Okay, we're going to vote on number 1 first. Those in favor? Sorry, I don't see enough hands. We're dealing with number 1 on the consent, naming of a private street. Those in favor? Those opposed? It's carried. We are now voting on moving number 6 out of consent. It's been moved by Councillor Gazzola. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And moving number 7 out of consent. All in favor? That's carried. All right, Councillor Gazzola, go ahead. We will start with number 6.
Yeah, no, on number 6, I wanted to draw attention on page 6.2 at the improvements that have been have resulted from the traffic calming on Sydney Street. There's a 20% decrease in the 85th percentile, which I think is a tremendous results. And I was my question was, on the table 2, there are no previous figures, and I was just trying to see if there are previous figures, or to try to check what the improvement, if any, is there.
Mr. Cronkite?
Through you, Madam Chair, the reason that you see a second figure in there, initially when we conducted the studies back in, I believe, 2010, we did one location along Sydney Avenue South. When we went to update our studies, what had happened was that we had conducted additional studies so that we can get a feel for how for all intents and purposes, cycling and pedestrian traffic is acting in the neighborhood based on what we did on Nyberg in terms of the contraflow bike lane. So rather than basically not showing you the information that we had collected for a different study, we included it within this report as well, so you could see the impact that it's having along the entirety of the street rather than one singular location. So there's really no previous data to compare to.
Oh, okay, I understand, and that's fine. And again, that's a 45 is a very good figure. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, there's no further questions on 6. Okay, so let's vote on number 6. Those in favor? That's carried. Okay, number 7, the updated corporate asset management policy. Councillor Fernandez.
Yes. Hello, Jason. Just a couple questions. I mean, asset management is critical to making sure that our facilities and our infrastructure gets updated on a regular basis. I didn't see, because it talks about Phase 1 AMP and Phase 2 AMP, what the frequency of updates would be. So it talks about regularly update to involve data-driven strategies and operational recommendations in the policy.
Through the chair, the timeline between Phase 1 and Phase 2 is going to be typically between 3 and 4 years. The reason for that is that we need to close the gaps in terms of the information that's necessary to be able to develop a Phase 2 AMP.
Okay. So where are we now on, do we have our assets categorized in specific, like let's just say arenas in a certain area, community centers in another, roads, parks? Do we have them categorized so that there's kind of a succession kind of planning on how we address improvements or replacements?
Through the chair, during the strategic session, I put up a roadmap. I'm wondering if we can show this. So the asset management categories are based on criteria around risk and impact. We do have a roadmap based on the amount of information that is available. So between the start in 2016 to 2022, the asset categories that are identified in orange are Phase 1, and then Phase 2 are the green asset categories, so that by the end of 2022, all 12 asset categories will have detailed lifecycle management plans.
Okay, that's very good. All right, thank you very much. I think that was, so there really isn't any significant changes in the policy then?
Through the chair, the only real significant inclusion is now wording surrounding resiliency and sustainability as it relates to climate action planning. So in terms of the rest of the program, it's still moving forward.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
Councillor Gazzola?
Yeah, my question's been sort of answered. I was trying to figure out what is different, that we're doing an update. I would have liked to have seen, you've given us the complete document. I would have liked to have seen sort of some indication in the document as to what specifically is changed. Is that difficult to do, or?
Through the chair, based on updates to the strategy moving forward and based on the roadmap, we have made slight changes in terms of the approach on developing asset management plans, in terms of splitting out Phase 1 and Phase 2. But in terms of the scope and accountability that was initial in the first policy, that hasn't changed in this updated policy.
So if I take all of those pages, 9 pages, there are no changes in the wordings on those pages?
Through the chair, there is wording changes, and there are areas that we have expanded. One specific example would be around service levels. A focus of our asset management program moving forward will deal with that as well.
No, but it would be nice to see in your document where there actually are. Otherwise, it's a big, long, almost legal document. But what does it mean if we can't zero in on where the words have been changed?
Mr. Reedman would like to pipe in.
Through the chair, so there were minor changes to the main document. The major changes were adding sustainability and resiliency into the document, but staff can circulate a red line version of those changes after this meeting.
That's all I'm asking for. Old people like red liners.
Councillor Marsh?
Yeah, just in follow-up to that question, I'm just curious if you would be able to give us an example, whether now or later in an email, of a concrete example of how this new direction will change what we would have done previously.
Through the chair, with the inclusion of sustainability and resiliency factors, we're now introducing climate change as a risk factor when we're starting to develop our life cycle management plans. So we're taking a direct look at how climate is impacting the condition of any asset that's related to that life cycle management plan. So we will continue to introduce parameters and components that we haven't in the past in terms of identifying risk to whether or not climate change is having an adverse effect on any of our assets.
Oh, okay. Well, I understand then that, and I understood from the report that it was going to change the approach, or that you'd add that perspective regarding climate change and risk management, or asset management, I should say, and risks associated with it. But I'm just, I think what I do think will be helpful, beyond just underlining in red what changed in the policy, is if later, and I don't want to put anybody in the spot, I'd like to understand an example of how that actually will change things. So you're going to consider things, but what will you do differently? Is what I would like to know. Yeah, thanks. Just for my own understanding and perhaps for all of council.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Mr. Reedman?
Through the chair, maybe I can add a bit more context. I've been more involved in the climate adaptation mitigation component. So I know some of our biggest risk factors are flooding or drought, as well as ice storms. So those considerations will be in how we design our sewers, how we design our low-impact development to allow water to get back into the groundwater table, and even our forestry management when that asset management plan is fully developed. Considerations with hydro wires and forestry and how those things will be rationalized. So those are the types of considerations that will be incorporated through asset management as we move forward.
Councillor Fernandez?
Thank you. Just one more question, because when you talked about sustainability and resilience, the first words that I read were around urban forestry. So we've done an awful lot of work in assessing our urban forests through one of our staff people, Mr. Schmidt. Is this asset management plan and policy going to address all of that work as well?
Through the chair, yes. As part of the overall urban forest master plan, it is very foundational that asset management is part of that, so the same principles are going to apply for that asset category as we are for others.
Okay, because that's very important. I think that all that work that was done in understanding the value of our urban forests and our boulevard trees and all those areas, as people, sometimes we take it for granted, and then we have a storm and we lose 20 trees somewhere. Then we see the benefit of it. So I'm glad that that's in the policy. I should have asked that on my first round of questions, but thank you.
Okay, that's all the questions that we have. Thank you very much. So it's been moved by Councillor Ioannidis. All in favor? That's carried. And then we have to do 2 through 5. Those in favor? Those opposed? Okay, so today I'm looking for hands. We had enough for a vote, but there's been a number of hands that haven't been going up in favor or opposed, and it's more than one person. So I'd like to encourage everyone to put their hand up when a vote's called. So consent items, I'm not too worried. We had enough in favor, but moving forward, I'd like to see some more hands. Thank you. Now we're moving on to number 8, Dahmer Drive. Are there any questions? There's no presentation from staff. Traffic calming. Councillor Schneider?
I would like to move this and just when appropriate time make some comments as well.
Okay. It may be appropriate. Oh, no. I have some questions. So if you want to queue back in, we'll have some comments after. Councillor Gazzola?
I have a couple of questions. I noticed that from looking at the map, that the bumps are put in very close to where an intersection comes out. I just wondered why they were there as opposed to in the middle of a block.
Sorry. Mr. Carmichael.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. It simply comes down to locating the measures where they'll be most effective in providing appropriate spacing. If you look through the stretch of Daimler from Lackner down to Old Chicopee Drive, you'll see that the 3 proposed speed humps are evenly distributed through that corridor. The idea being that the spacing is similar, predictable for drivers, and studies have shown that results in the best speed reduction. The fact that it's near intersections really shouldn't have any impact on operations at those intersections.
Okay, I see that, and I can see if you look at the map, and I gather when I stop to think of it, if someone's turning out of Corfield, that's not the person we're concerned about. It's the person that's coming straight through. So, okay, I appreciate that. Now, the other question I have is on this question of direct and indirect. Whether people are directly or indirectly affected, and how does that work? Because I noticed I tried to follow through this. The first time there were 143 memos sent out. The next time there's 86, and the next time there's 57. Where do we stand on all of those?
Through you, Madam Chair, our process for reaching out and getting input from the local residents in the area is what we do is we notify everyone in the area, not only on the roadway that we're reviewing, but the roadways that tie into that roadway within the neighborhood. We notify them of the review. When we get into the process and the formal review and get down to establishing a preferred alternative, we also survey all those residents, both ones that live directly on the roadway and those that live in the immediate area, on the proposed alternative. When we report back to council with our report, our staff recommendation is based on the people living directly on the roadway only. And that's based on the fact that those people living on that roadway have to live with the conditions 24/7. It's their kids playing out in front of their house, them getting in and out of their driveways on that roadway, so on and so forth. Whereas the other people in the neighborhood, well, their voices need to be heard. Their mandate would be a little different, and they're just driving that route, whether they're on their way to and from work. So when we updated the policy with you folks a couple of years ago, we outlined that and agreed that we would still base our staff recommendations based on the input received from the directly affected residents, but we would also feed into the report the survey results from the other people in the neighborhood, just as an informational piece for you folks.
So in this particular situation, is it 86 people that are directly affected? Is that it?
That's correct. That's how many properties would be on Daimler or
yeah,
have
as opposed to the 143 took everybody into account.
Correct.
Yeah. Now, on the next one, what is that one? That one, we're down to 57 people, or 57 properties. What is that?
We're just dealing with number 8 right now.
That's it.
Are you talking about the next report, or?
No.
Oh, sorry.
On the second one on page 8-2.
I missed.
Yeah. In response, the 86 is the number of people or properties directly on the roadway. The 57 are the properties that are in the area, but weren't directly on the roadway.
Oh, okay. So the 86 and the 57 make up the 143.
That's
okay,
correct.
Okay, that's fine then. Okay, so they, because they come off, the numbers are a little distorted, but they're less affected. Okay, I apologize for the not knowing what I'm doing. Thank you.
Councillor Fernandez.
Yeah, just a question on the one speed hump that is located just, I guess, the old Chicopee Trail. Is that and Breckwood? Is that a trail connection?
It's a public walkway.
Across, like, is that going to be a crosswalk kind of scenario?
It's not. Our understanding, in response through Madam Chair, our understanding that's not a walkway, and there's not a defined pedestrian path through that area that we recommend a raised crosswalk instead of a speed hump.
I'm sorry, Ken, I couldn't hear you. I think
Right, no worries. Our recommendation is based on there's not a defined pedestrian pathway or demonstrated pedestrian demand through that corridor, and that's not a public walkway. So that's why we decided to proceed with a speed hump instead of a raised crosswalk.
Okay. So it's not a recognized trail. Is it a foot? I guess it's showing on the map like it is, and that's why I was thinking it's a perfect spot to have a raised crosswalk. But maybe I'm not seeing it correctly.
Yeah, through the Madam Chair, it is a walkway that connects to Breckwood, but that's all. It only connects Breckwood to Daimler. So it doesn't. There's no continuing trail pattern through there that would dictate a raised crosswalk.
Okay. This is a school route, right, to the new Lackner School, the Chicopee School. Sorry.
Yes, I believe the south area would be included there. Yes.
Okay. And again, that's why I was kind of thinking that this is maybe a good shortcut for these kids to go to school. But I mean, I think it's good that you've spaced them out the way you have. Nobody's really going to be able to pick up a lot of speed. Plus, you've got a cross street at Briar Meadow, which means that there's stop signs at that cross. Is there stop signs on both ways on that crossing? Or is it just at Briar Meadow?
The intersection, through the chair, the intersection of Daimler and Briar Meadow is an all-way stop, so all legs are stopping there.
It's an all-way stop. Okay, that's great. Okay, no, thank you.
Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair. Galloway Seelock. I'm so very happy to move this. I do want to point out there was some excellent engagement from the residents on this street. I remember being at the initial meeting at Elected Woods Public School, where we actually had to bring out extra chairs, and at the end of the meeting, I had a number of constituents come up and say things like, wow, this was a great meeting. I thought you were just going to come here and tell us what you were going to do. We were listened to. The engagement was great. We even had one resident stand up in the meeting and say, you know, look, let's be honest, we're the ones that live on this street, and I'll admit that I've spent on this street, and we've got our own work to do on keeping our speed down ourselves. But the way the information was taken in and presented, I think that's why you see such a high approval rate of this. So just wanted to give some real kudos to Mr. Contrite and his staff for the great work they did, and all the information they took in and how it formed the final planning.
Thank you. That's all the questions and comments. So I will call the question. All in favor? That's carried. Okay, we'll move on to the next one, Max Becker Drive. Councillor Gazzola?
I'm trying to understand here where there were 214 homes surveyed, and we only received 64, which is a really low reply. So are there not some rules when the reply is so low like that?
Through the chair, I'm sorry, could you repeat that last question?
No, I thought there were two aspects. You had to have a certain number of the people that replied, but also a certain percentage for the total area coverage.
Yes, through the chair, that's correct. Our policy states that we require a minimum of 50% response rate and 60% support rate. Most of our reviews have typically gotten those minimum numbers, but there have been a few over the years that haven't, and we typically, based on the strong support rate for the plan, we still recommend it because we still feel that it's good traffic engineering and is addressing the concerns that have been identified out in that area.
So you have the ability to overrule that sort of policy then? And I'm not arguing with it.
No, I was just going to say, as staff, I would suggest that, yeah, we would make a recommendation that might be outside of the policy. We'll acknowledge that in the report, but the final decision would be obviously around the horseshoe.
Again, just a final question. I really find it difficult to understand how we're always talking about public engagement, and yet when we have issues like this, we don't hear from more people. Is there, when you send out these letters, is there a category that says, I'm happy and that's it, or I'm just wondering, how do we get the numbers up?
Yeah, it's valid points you make. We do outline in the survey that, and we clearly say to the residents, if they do not respond to the survey, that they are okay with those who respond are saying, the recommendations from those who respond. Getting public input and getting responses to surveys like this, we do ones for parking regulations and other types of things, has always been a challenge. I will say that we are working with with communications and also the neighborhood engagement group to work on other ways that we can hopefully garner further input, whether it's online survey monkeys, other opportunities where we can encourage that input. It's always been a challenge, but we're working to try to make it a lot easier and encourage those residents to provide their input.
Mr. Cronkite, did you want to add something?
Sure. Further, through the chair, further to Mr. Carmichael's comments, one of the challenges along Max Becker Drive is really the type of street that it is. So it's not your typical single-family detached dwellings that you would see, comparing it to the one we just talked about, Daimler Drive. This is a lot of street-fronting towns and a medium to higher density street. So in those types of scenarios, because there are more rentals prevalent and shorter duration in terms of life cycle of home establishment there, generally speaking, our response rates are lower in those types of conditions. So when we run into those types of conditions, what we do is we take that into consideration as well. We take that information and then we give the response rate in advance of this meeting to the councillor so that we can have a general conversation about the conditions of the street in relation to the type of people that are in the neighborhood, and that is all factored in. We have to recognize that in locations where you may not live quite nearly as long as you would if you were, say, a resident of Daimler Drive, that those conditions do play a part as well.
What if we took the approach that an abstention, no answer would be taken as a negative vote? Just food for thought.
Are you looking for an answer to that question?
For staff, that's a political question. Is there any other questions? Because I have a few. I'm pretty sure you probably know where my question's going to go. At Copperleaf Crescent and Copperleaf Street, why a narrowing of intersection and not a four-way stop?
Through the chair, we did study that intersection for an all-way stop. So, as you can appreciate, an all-way stop isn't intended to calm traffic, but rather control traffic. So it designates right-of-way to the appropriate street. Generally speaking, whenever we look at all-way stops, especially when they're unwarranted, statistics dictate that an unwarranted all-way stop generally leads to an increase in rear-end collisions and also jeopardizes pedestrian safety rather than enhances. So in this instance in particular, by narrowing the roadway, we can get that ancillary benefit of reducing speed without the disbenefit of potentially increasing rear-end collisions or negatively impacting pedestrian safety.
Okay. The other question I have is with respect to number 4 at Isabella Street. Did we look at any option for a raised crosswalk there? Because that is leading right to a school, as opposed to just the intersection. There's hundreds of kids that cross at that section.
Through the chair, we really focused the raised pedestrian crosswalk where we have the adult crossing guard further on down the street, rather than creating a situation where we may create added confusion by adding another raised pedestrian crosswalk. We didn't want to do that. We wanted to make sure that we're not detracting from one measure by installing a similar measure down the street, which would cause that confusion, if that makes sense.
I didn't follow.
So the raised crosswalk, is, let me go through this for a second. Bear with me. Sorry, the narrowed intersection will have the same impact. What we didn't do was the raised portion, right? So the raised portion in this instance, in this section, would impact transit and emergency services. So we added a raised measure west of this location, further on down Max Becker Drive, where we don't have transit, but in this area in particular, it's impacted by transit and emergency services, so we didn't do the raised portion.
Can we look at doing the raised portion just on that one? Just because of the, we're seeing a lot of kids are being hit actually at this spot. Nothing that's been serious in nature as of yet that I'm aware of. And so I think this one might need a little special attention. This whole street, we continue to see children getting hit by cars. So we need these measures, but can we, is there the ability to make an amendment to make that a raised crosswalk?
My recommendation would be to move forward with the plan as is, keeping in mind that when we do these reviews, we come back a year later and conduct follow-up studies. If after the follow-up review, you as the ward councillor and staff feel that there is still a condition that we need to address, we could address it at that time. But I would rather take a phased approach and make sure that we're addressing it appropriately initially without impacting fire and transit.
Okay, and so there's no transit from the previous one, the traffic calming that we just spoke of on Dahmer?
There's not, no.
No transit, but it still would be an access for emergency services.
Through the chair, this is identified there's a big difference between Daimler Drive and Max Becker Drive in terms of its access to the overall neighborhood. So Daimler Drive isn't required specifically to get to most of the neighborhood from an emergency services perspective, whereas with Max Becker Drive, it's really an essential connection for them. So it's really apples and oranges in terms of the comparison.
Okay. Councillor Marsh?
Thank you. So further to that question, I just wonder, rather than a speed hump, but a raised crosswalk, would that be considered a speed table? Another way, would there be another way to describe it as a speed table? And would that have the same impact as what you were just discussing on?
Through the chair, the raised crosswalk is simply a speed hump, but with the roadway narrowed to reduce the crossing distance, so it's the same impact.
Okay, and is there a signalized crossing in front of the school there at Isabella?
No, there is not.
Has that been considered in this traffic calming plan? I mean, if we have children being hit on the road, that's very alarming to hear, and I'm just wondering to what extent that issue has been addressed through our plans.
Through the chair, pedestrian crossover, I think, is what you're referring to. We haven't, in terms of the PXO legislation, we haven't fully determined how we're going to roll that out citywide yet. We haven't reviewed this location for the implementation of a pedestrian crossover. However, again, going back to what I had mentioned earlier, if we treat this as a phased approach and we feel, once we're doing the follow-up review, that there are still pedestrian safety concerns here, then we can address them at that time.
Okay. Well, I would put forward an amendment to the motion that we ask staff to look at the feasibility of a PXO in this next 6 months, rather than waiting a year and then thinking about it and then deciding. I think we need to take the number of children being affected seriously.
Through the chair, that's a reasonable request. We're happy to follow up on.
Sorry, so just so I'm clear, the amendments to look at?
Mitigations, including pedestrian crossover and potentially some form of, it would be a crosswalk for children to be able to cross safely at that intersection.
Did I hear you say in the next 6 months?
Yeah, let's say by August 2018.
Okay, thank you. I'm not even sure I've had a mover for this one yet, so okay. Are there any other questions? Comments? No, I'm just going to make one quick comment then. Well, it might not be quick. This street is considered a major collector in a ton of cars. I travel on it on a daily basis. And as Barry's already alluded, it's a lot of front townhomes. This community has always been hard to engage. Ward 5 continues to have the lowest voter turnout, so it's not a surprise that we would have a low turnout on a traffic calming plan. But the people who did come out to the meetings were very adamant that there needed to be changes and the safety of their children are paramount. We actually have 3 schools you can't see, but in the top left corner is John Sweeney School, and just to the other side is W.T. Townsend. So this street actually looks at 3 elementary schools, this whole traffic calming plan. They all go to either Williamsburg, John Sweeney, or W.T. Townsend. And all of those schools have had additions put on them. So we have a large population of kids, so there's something that needs to be done on this. I'm happy that the amendment's being brought forward, even though I would like to see a raised crosswalk at Isabella right now. I can see the phased approach working as well. And I've continually heard about Copperleaf Crescent being an issue of cars, like they won't even turn left out there. They'll turn right and take a longer detour to go around. So I still do have concerns with that one as well. But I'm willing to see how these changes will work with the roadway. I appreciate staff's job on doing this, because it is an interesting type of road with many dynamics, and it's not unanimous. There's people that I'm hearing from that don't necessarily want to see these measures in place, but at the end of the day, safety is the #1 priority that I have, and especially for the students. And so I would like everyone to support this if they see fit. Councillor Gazzola?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, the normal process is that they bring back a report after a year, and what we're trying to amend here is that they bring back a report after 4 months? Is that the change that we're making? No. What is the change that we're making, that you're...
Go ahead, Councillor Marsh.
All right, here. So, I don't see in the recommendation a timeline for when they would come back, but it's common practice that all of the traffic calming measures that are being implemented as a part of this motion will be reviewed and looked at in a year. And I'm not changing that. What I'm asking for is at one intersection in front of the school at Isabella, that staff look at the new PXO legislation. Well, it's not that new. It's a year and a half, or like it's over a year now, isn't it? And so it might seem new, except come on, we have to let's try and utilize it. I have some spots in. I'm sure all of us have spots in all of our wards that we'd like to see more use of that type of crosswalk. But I'm seeing an opportunity here for us to do that. And since staff have not created a citywide strategy for implementing PXOs across the board, I think this is a perfect opportunity to pilot a process by which they can determine what's the best treatment of that spot, given the fact that it's in front of a school. Now, I'm not asking for the rest of it to be reviewed in any early fashion. I'm asking for staff to revisit that one intersection, period.
Mr. Carmichael?
Yes, just wanted to clarify. The one-year follow-up review is executed 1 year after the measures are in place, not 1 year after we've approved it, so keep that in mind. The suggestion to review this intersection specifically for the pedestrian concerns is very manageable for staff. We can do our studies before the end of the school year, report back in August, and it can be dealt with, I would suggest, separately from the traffic calm review or incorporated into it if we need to.
Okay, thank you. Okay, there's no further questions or comments. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. And I believe that is all from the Community Infrastructure Services Committee. We're adjourned.